Hi folks, welcome back. Another leftist has apparently entered the fray, and unfortunately for her own cause, she's done a terrible job. I'm talking about Rachel Oates, who positions herself as a progressive feminist commentator and reacts to my content by folding it into a broader right-wing radicalization narrative. The irony here is that unintentionally, and I mean genuinely unintentionally, she ends up proving the majority of my points. Now, we're going to dissect this point by point. She made an hour-long video responding to me, and while I appreciate the dedication, I'm not going to spend an hour on her. I'm going to get straight to the chase and break down the core weaknesses in her argument, because from the beginning, she substitutes judgment for any sort of analysis. She presents a conclusion first and evidence later, if ever, to be honest with you. She opens by asserting some version of a canceled YouTuber to right-wing grifter pipeline, claims I'm out of control, and frames me as yet another example of, this right-wing grift. This is pure narrative framing, not actual analysis. Absolutely nothing has been demonstrated yet, and the verdict is already in before she even engages with a single argument I've made. And that is by design. See, it's a manipulative tactic meant to prime the audience emotionally before any facts are actually introduced. It's persuasion by framing rather than actual reasoning. And it's a classic move from someone deeply insecure in their ability to actually debate ideas. Instead of engaging with my claims, she chooses to, out the gate, attack my character to establish me as someone unworthy of being listened to. And the irony is that she does all of this while still spending an hour responding to me in detail. Now, from there, she leans heavily on Autobiography as a substitute for evidence. Now, we've seen other creators like Evangelina Scoff do this kind of stuff, and we established that when someone has to appeal to authority immediately, it's usually because they lack any sort of argumentation. Rachel spends large portions of her video talking about her past viewing habits, her feelings about thumbnails, her taste in comedy, her emotional reactions, her exhaustion, her dog's health, and her mental state. None of this advances a factual rebuttal. This is ethos inflation. She's clearly trying to establish moral sincerity so claims feel true without actually having to be proven. It's emotional appeal designed to bypass logic entirely. Now, all that being said, she then quickly moves into character poisoning. Before addressing any argument I've made, she repeatedly labels me as canceled, failing, crashing out, irrelevant, and grifting for attention. This is textbook poisoning the well. She assumes my emotional state, attributes motives without any sort of evidence, and commits basic genetic fallacies throughout. None of this actually engages with the data I presented, with the per capita logic I presented, or my actual central thesis in my videos. It's all designed to make the audience dismiss the argument before they even hear it. So now that we've established that she is thoroughly dishonest in her engagement of my videos, it's no surprise that she then goes into a classic bait and switch. She moves from data to motive, right? She repeatedly claims I'm doing this for attention, rage bait, controversy, and that I don't actually care about the topic. Even if all that were true, which by the way, she never proves, it would not falsify any of my claims. This is a clear genetic fallacy. Again, she's attacking why an argument is made instead of whether it's actually correct. She's not presenting any sort of data to counterpoint the data that I presented. In fact, she has to rely on repeatedly strawmanning my central claim. Over and over, she reframes my position as gay people are more dangerous around children, or that I want to stop gay men from being around children. This completely ignores the distinctions I explicitly make between orientation and offender classification, population base rates and offender subsets, and overrepresentation versus universal guilt. Now, what's worse is that she later admits these distinctions herself. She concedes to the point. Then she continues attacking the straw man anyway. You can't make this up. These people are irrational. And just to be clear, this doesn't arise out of confusion. This is just deliberate misframing because this is the only way that she can engage. I say that in quotes because it's not actual engagement with the argument. Ironically, she then makes an accidental concession of my core point, which is honestly one of the most important moments in her entire video. She states that certain offenders have higher victim counts, that this is due to access, that boys are less likely to report, that same-sex access environments create opportunity, and that offenders exploit those conditions. Hey, guess what? None of this refutes my argument. It actually confirms the overrepresentation pattern I've been describing. She simply tries to rebrand it as socially caused instead of actually acknowledging the data that I'm presenting. So in other words, folks, she concedes the pattern exists, the disparity exists, and the victim count disparity exists as well. Then she argues why. That's not a rebuttal, okay? It's an explanatory add-on that strengthens my case. So thank you, Rachel. Appreciate you. Anyway, from there, she falls into a logical contradiction on accountability. She accepts the premise that I present. She acknowledges the data, the pattern, the structural causes, while insisting the question itself should not be asked. She argues that discussion is harmful and immoral. Folks, that's incoherent, okay? If a pattern exists and harms people, discussion is not optional. You cannot argue this happens, and by the way, we shouldn't talk about it, simultaneously. In practice, this kind of silencing perpetuates abuse by protecting predators from scrutiny, okay? Sunlight is the best disinfectant. Without open discussion, nothing changes. Which, by the way, all of that in and of itself is also one of the points that I've been making since the original video that I made in response to Adam. That unfortunately these topics aren't discussed and that there is an effort within the LGBT community to prevent the discussion of these topics. She, in practice, proved my point. Once again, thank you, Rachel. Now, again, it's no surprise that she then has to resort to citation pedantry without offering any sort of counter-analysis. You see, when people can't challenge data, folks, they scrutinize presentation. She nitpicks phrasing, definitions, and procedural details, but never actually challenges sample sizes, the victim ratios, the per capita math that I present, or produces any sort of alternative data sets. Clerical nitpicking is not a substantive rebuttal. So let me make this clear one more time. Clerical nitpicking is not an actual substantive rebuttal. Okay, correcting wording does not invalidate the findings that I presented. It simply proves she's unwilling or perhaps unable to actually engage with the numbers that I presented. Now on to something that I can only describe as a meltdown, because after that, the video collapses into a massive topic drift. She floods the zone with ICE, Trump, Gaza, Holocaust analogies, Christian nationalism, Nick Fuentes, Charlie Kirk, Paul and Morgan, Gabby Hanna, and her personal trauma. This is scope collapse through emotional saturation, folks. Overwhelming the viewer with moral emergencies, so the original claim disappears. So she doesn't actually have to rebut any of what I said, even though she conceded to it. That's not analysis. That's just avoidance, okay? But it doesn't stop there, because she then applies moral absolutism selectively. She condemns violence in principle while selectively contextualizing or excusing it based on her ideology. This inconsistency undermines her moral authority and reinforces my claim about narrative-driven judgment. And by the way, she takes it even a step further, because when her logic inevitably fails, and it fails all the time in this video, she escalates to historical extremes, comparing border enforcement and online commentary to Nazi Germany and pre-Holocaust conditions. This is classic reductio ad hilarem, substituting historical horror for argument. And by the way, I do want to make one thing absolutely clear. As an American who lives in Los Angeles, I genuinely do not care what a foreigner thinks about American politics. You don't live here. You don't pay taxes here. You don't deal with the consequences of our policies. Your opinion does not matter to the majority of Americans. Most people here are focused on paying their bills, raising their families, and surviving in a country with, some issues going on right now. We don't need moral lectures from abroad about how 330 million people should live. If you believe in open borders so passionately, why don't you apply that logic to your own country? Take in millions of people. America already accepts close to 1 million legal immigrants every year. How many does your country take? The level of entitlement to believe that you can dictate policy for a nation you don't even live in, you don't fund, and you don't experience a day-to-day in is beyond me. Seriously. Why should we listen to you? Who cares? Okay? Wanting to take care of Americans first is not radical. It is absolutely reasonable. A country should take care of its citizens. Now, that said, by the end of her video, emotion fully replaces any sort of analysis. She's crying, apologizing, discussing exhaustion, dog health, and sleep deprivation. None of this invalidates her as a person, by the way, but it confirms the video is driven purely by emotion, not actual structured reasoning. She even admits this herself, saying this isn't as academic as her usual work. Another concession. Thank you, Rachel, for once again conceding. Look, bottom line, Rachel Oates doesn't rebut my argument. She concedes the underlying pattern that I present. She reframes causality. She declares discussion of this topic immoral. She attacks my motive. She floods the zone with unrelated crises. She escalates to historical catastrophe and avoids any sort of per capita engagement entirely. Functionally, her video actually supports my thesis. Certain topics are aggressively insulated from scrutiny, not by refuting data, but by moralizing the discussion itself. So once again, thank you, Rachel, for proving my point. You did a terrific job showing exactly why this conversation is necessary and why people like yourself who are ill-equipped to actually have this conversation should maybe just sit on the sidelines. Anyway, all that being said, folks, let me know what you think in the comments down below. Hope you have a terrific day. Peace.